Hello, not frauds. We are back with Neblime versus Hamster. Let's get these last two games on Sideshow underway. So, Neblime and Hamster are most likely, as mentioned in the previous episode of this particular set, most likely going to meet each other at some point in the playoffs. They are on the same side of the bracket, so if basically the only way that they wouldn't meet each other is if, like, say, either Neblime or Hamster gets knocked down to the lower bracket and the other one progresses, and then like one of them gets eliminated or something. But odds are, I'm guessing, we're going to see Neblime versus Hamster at some point. So, as I tried to mention in the first time I was, or I guess the second video in this set, right when I was casting that second match, just sort of previewing the playoffs of Ascension number 6, presumably anyway, a potential matchup here. And I felt like Neblime hadn't played in a little bit, like leading up to this series. And then he also entered a period of relative dormancy where he hadn't played in a little bit after that. So it's kind of interesting. Now, he did end up acing his group. It wasn't against the most sterling of competition, we'll say, but he was able to, at the very least, put up a good performance in the group stage. He didn't get caught off. He didn't slip on any banana peels, as we would call it. And, that was mostly thinking like, oh, it depends. He's a new guy. The Beaver, he's not been in the game for a long time. Are we going to see macro games or anything like that? Or is it just going to be crazy cheese? And he was able to survive the crazy cheese and the beginner's instinct, right? So we kind of had two easier Terran opponents in that sense. Going up against Hamster is a very, very different beast, and I say that without an ounce of irony. Obviously, the guy is a fan of the Joker, judging by his profile picture. And he's thinking that he's going to make sure Neblime gets what he fucking deserves. So I guess that's pretty much the rallying cry heard around the world. He does have an in-base hatch. This is a fairly safe option. I was actually thinking a lot about the in-base hatch here as Hamster our Mango Zerg in the bottom right. He will be going to put down his Quasith pool. Interesting location against the Alice Blue Terran. Top left, that's Neblime. Now that we're almost 2 minutes into the game, it's a fine time to introduce our players. One of the things that I wanted to sort of analyze as we go on and we further develop the meta is whether or not in-base hatch is always superior to natural hatch. I was originally thinking that they're kind of like, they serve different purposes. And I'm wondering now if maybe Hamster's onto something here with the in-base hatch always being better. I do think that you can take the natural hatch and then, on maps like this, especially on Sideshow and on High Water and other such maps, you can pretty easily go for and expand into a wall of sorts, like a pseudo wall. So if you're suspecting early play, but not super early, that it's like a 6 pool or something, then you might be able to do like hatch first on the low ground, specifically to get the Kagra down there. And that way you don't need to spend an Ovaleth, which is fairly expensive with early gas. You don't need to use that. So he does scout around with his Droleth, just making sure that there's no proxy shenanigans, at least immediately within vision. Obviously, Neblime's Mason is still around that 5.5 o'clock base. I don't even know if it's worth using the and a half. I think I might just say 5. But you would normally say 5 for the bottom right-hand corner, I think. So a little bit awkward there when there's the third option that's also, I guess it's like, it's 5.5 and 6.5. So I don't know. You guys can comment below if you find the o'clocks useful. I know some people don't really have that much familiarity with it, but for those who do actually understand what I'm saying when I say the o'clock positions, please tell me whether or not the halves are actually useful. I've never really heard anybody use 5.5 or whatever, but that is the position of the third. And then conversely, obviously, I guess this would then be 11.5, right? So kind of interesting there. Neblime does have his expansion up before the Zerg, which is definitely a little bit interesting. But Neblime is that kind of player, right? He is adding a star pad behind this. He's very, very light on military. He only has the 3 Mavericks inside the anchor and the 2 standing guard on the mineral line in case of any Nathricor-oriented shenanigans. And we do have some military units starting to be gestated by Hamster, who is adding a Kagrin in a peculiar position inside his main. I kind of wanted to check the eggs in case anything was an Ovaleth, because I almost feel like that's placed so far forward that it's not really going to be useful in the defense. But we'll see what he ends up turning it into, as it is hatched right now. There's not really anything blinking out of the star pad. I think Neblime is considering his options. Looks like it will be an Anseal for scouting. And we do have a Hydrith then coming up as a follow-up, as additional gas being harvested from the natural by Hamster. So kind of an interesting choice, because when you get early gas and you go Hydrith, it is going to be a Circuit in the main, by the way, so I guess anti-drop. One of the things that I'm always interested in is, like, is Hamster going to be going for, you know, a more ground contingent army, or is he maybe going to do, maybe we're going to see like a prototype of what he ended up doing against Mystery Meat in the high water match in Group A. I believe this is the fourth matchup of that particular game, or that particular group, and it was an opportunity for Hamster to then go 4-0 in his group. And he did end up pivoting to Mass Skith at some point, which is a lot of gas to spend. So I wonder if maybe that's something that Hamster is thinking of doing here. I almost suspect that that's exactly what's happening here. Indeed, yes, we do have, looks like 5 Skiths on the way, make it 7. So that is a pretty heavy amount of gas. Obviously, you're multiplying whatever number of Skiths is by 50, because that's the amount of gas you can see is very, very low. Neblime, meanwhile, on track to go for a tier 2 timing, but predominantly has Mavericks and not even that many Watchdogs, right? He's got the 1 Watchdog in each base. 7 Skiths will take a while before they finalize and actually, you know, bring their opponent to their knees, but there's more coming after that. In fact, it looks like we're going to be going up to 11 Skiths in total, which is a lot of units. Now, for those who aren't familiar with the Skither Corps, the Nathacor's spotting the Atlas. This should really give Hamster a feeling that he has a window of opportunity to punish. But if it doesn't work out, his tech is going to be so very far behind. He does lose both Naths, and his 7 Skiths are now idling. The Anseal is going to reveal that at least 2 Skiths have been made. I'm not sure that he spotted all of the eggs, and when you detect something in CMBW, you can click on the production facility, or the egg in this case, and actually see what is being made and how far along it is. So you basically get the progress bar of like, and the training queue and stuff. So that's definitely very useful if he's mid-made aware. But he will end up getting, having this Watchdog be interrupted. It looks like a little bit of missed micro here as the magic boxing shenanigans are happening, where Hamster is like kind of clicking down here, but he had the whole group, so they didn't go that far. So that, I think, kind of dissuaded any additional follow-up pressure. He is getting some damage by forcing cancels, or I think in that case he just outright killed the Watchdog that I was gestating. Is the Skither Corps? Yeah, this is actually pre-buff, so they still only have 2 range at this point. Whereas obviously in the final tournament version they have 3 range, which is a little bit better. And you could see just how easy it is to deal with those kinds of units in that kind of capacity, where they just get absolutely stomped upon. So that's definitely something you got to watch out for. The second Fulcrum on the way. In the meantime, obviously, the Atlas is concluded and the Palladium is on the way. I don't know that the range would have made a huge difference. It probably would have improved the, I guess, like the handling of the unit. But I still think Neblime's response was adequate. And again, this is a situation where there's been more skits made behind this, right? That's another round of, say, 200 gas, it looks like, maybe more. Looks like, yeah, it's 400 more gas on the way from just the skits. He's desperately trying to kill this Palladium before he, his opponent can mass up enough madrigals. But he's essentially, yeah, at this point, Hamster he's really, really all into this position, this idea that he's going to be trying to win in the early game with just air. Like, if he doesn't win here, he could absolutely get slapped across the face by the madrigal that's about to pop out. Not just in terms of his skits, but his worker line too. So there you go. It does pop out. It is falling back. It's going to go ahead and deploy. I don't know how much value is in there in splitting. It looks like it will end up falling without too much contest, but it softens up a lot of the skits that the follow-up Cyprian and the Watchdogs that are now creeping forward, leapfrogging forward, they are going to be given a little bit of an option here. And because there's so few skits actively attacking this Palladium, it's going to take a long time for them to actually kill it. So they do end up killing it. It's not a huge cost, but it does slow down the production of additional madrigals. Now, there is another one just finished, and indeed another madrigal is on the way. I'm keeping a keen eye on the mini-map in case I lose sight of a drop or something due to the color. And indeed, we do have 12 skits again, so a pretty healthy count. And it looks like maybe there was an attack at some point, or maybe only now the Masons are bothering to deal with that. But it looks like, indeed, a bunch of them will end up falling. Some of them end up getting very, very softened up. And he only ends up losing 2, and he kills maybe four Masons, it looks like. More Watchdogs being added. I'm still sort of like trying to pay attention to where the Trojans are. It looks like he's got 1 loaded with a single madrigal that is deployed. You can tell because it's 8 out of 8 transport space, when normally they are 4. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention again that the madrigal has seen a revision, We have some Zethicors out here as well as Quasis. I don't know that they can exactly storm the front, but maybe he can convince like the anchors to lift off or some more units to fall away. At this point, I feel like the base is kind of impenetrable. And Hamster is starting to bank some gas now, so it looks like he's going to go for a very late tier 2. His third base is up in that 5.5 location with only 3 workers harvesting gas, so he should be okay. Skits do end up committing directly into this place. It looks like they popped one of the madrigals, or maybe that was a Trojan. They don't yet have unique corpses, so it's hard to say. But either way, it looks like, yeah, we have 2 madrigals in this one, only 1 deployed one in that Trojan. So still very, very good options here. It looks like we do have another macro hatch happening. There is going to be a circuit. There's a lot of circuits to protect this area from drops. The Iris is on the way. I guess Hamster isn't completely out of the game yet. He's tried to be cost efficient with his Skithercore harassment to deal with the workers and such. And the Trojans do make a beeline outside. There's actually 3 of them in total, so this is most of the military for Neblime. And he's now kind of like, we're switching gears, right? The economic lead is going to be for Hamster. He's got more workers, he's got more bases. And I think this worker scout is even going to spot the position of the Trojans, depending on the pathing, and I don't really think Hamster clocked it exactly. His skits are still over here attacking Palladiums and such. And it looks like this base is... So this is a little bit of a mistake from Neblime. He doesn't really want to stop this base. It does end up getting canceled anyway, which is pretty good reactions there. And it looks like the same thing happened over here, where a ministry was started and then canceled. You can tell because the rubble is smaller. But because he actually showed his hand and now has to spend APM filling up his Trojans, when he could have just bypassed that base and come back for it later, he's buying time for the Skithercores to make their way back over to the base. Some defenses, some Quasis are out en route. There will be an unload, so there should still be good damage here because the Droleths themselves are not burrowing. But here come the Skits to clean up house, and I just feel like this attack could have been way more devastating. He could have wiped the mineral line of this base and then continued on into the main, or, you know, found a weak target somewhere else. Now, that being said, the focus was not on the clerics, so a lot of Skithercores end up going down. It still is kind of cost efficient, but despite all the worker deaths, I mean, you still have a lot of larvae. You still have a decent amount of minerals banked up, right? We're talking about, what, 5-6 hatch right now for the Zerg, and the tier 2 is done. So, okay, he does need to remax his workers. Maybe job is overall done. We do even see captaincies out because Neblime really likes bio, apparently, so that's cool to see. And it looks like now the Zerg is kind of flooding in. I feel like Hamster has not really been put in this position too often. You know, I did mention again the Madrigal has received a Furium mode change where it now fires in a stagger, which would obviously have significantly reduced the efficacy there. But, you know, generally speaking, you're going to be seeing Madrigals still. Like, they are a staple, but they're going to be a little bit more reasonable in the, you know, Ascension 7 patch, you could say, coming in. They're already on pre-release if you guys want to test them out. But, you know, a little bit of a sloppy macro, missing some cycles, missing some idle workers. But Hamster, I don't think he's been put into a situation where suddenly, you know, he's up against a Terran who's just been able to tech him out, hold on versus the big Skith attack that kind of like put Hamster himself behind in terms of tech timing even more than you normally are, since Zerg has an inferior tech timing because their cost is higher. He still hasn't tasked these workers onto minerals, which is where he's mostly hurting, and it looks like he'll now go ahead and correct that error and see what he can do there. I'm looking for tech. He does have a Mutat Spire. He's got a lot of workers over here in the main as well, kind of idling. Feels like he could be expanding behind this and trying to take over the bottom strip of the map, or maybe the right side. And, you know, getting out of your first 3 bases on Sideshow can be a bit of a challenge. But you can see, like, both players are kind of at a bit of a breaking point. You know, this is kind of late in the set where we're talking about, like, 6 games. This is the 6th game, right? So 5 have already been played. I wouldn't be surprised to see these kinds of mistakes for a little bit longer from both sides, since obviously they're probably a little bit on the tired side. And there's only one Circuit and only one Spraith, and they haven't been evolved, right? So we have the triple drop, including a Shaman, which is also deployed. And that, I think, might just be enough because, I mean, yeah, okay, it's not going to actually save this Madrigal. And I think the next one will also fall. So maybe it's not all out, you know, not all over. The Trojans are even going to fly over the stack of Quasis. That's a really big deal because that just really limits the frequency with which additional drops can be done, right? No other Trojans were made during this time. So Neblime does not have an instant follow-up. He is going to go ahead and try to take 12 o'clock, moving his forces down towards the 5.5, which does have a lot of circuits and does have a lot of Protathlors. They won't have cliff advantage because they weren't rallied to the right location, but it feels like Hamster should be able to start massing up enough Protathlors that he can maybe hit and run this position. He's a little bit slow on the draw there, and he does have a lot more units heading up to 12 o'clock, which is promptly canceled by Neblime. One Madrigal is going to go ahead and get drawn into the Oh, make it another one. Yeah, this is where you would want to put your units on like stop or hold position or something. And Neblime getting a little bit sloppy with that, and maybe not remembering how bad Brood War's pathing is. Although he should be. He's a veteran. So here comes more Protathalors to try to hold. This is where you're going to see Madrigals not be as useful because they're better in their other mode for Siege, but they don't actually outrange defenses anyway. The Spraith is down, so that could be consequential if additional drops are happening. Massive amount of Quasis are still hanging out in the 12 o'clock position, and a Droleth was sent up to that. I guess that's like a 1.5 or 2 or something. Most people would probably just say 1. And there you have it. This force is cleaned up. It manages to deal damage in the sense that it kills some Protathalors and kills some Kagrans. Bio stack with a Shaman and Phalanxes are on the way. If those Phalanxes don't siege, then the Quasis are going to have a really hard time actually killing them. So it looks like Neblime realizes that he is losing the Shaman. And really, at this point, I just kill the Mason. Because if you kill the Mason, it's going to be that much harder for him to like actually try to take this base. So this is a case where you see the armor really, really helping versus the Quasis. They do have 2x6 attack, so it's not just 1x6 damage. It's 2 attacks, and each one of them deals 3 damage. So when you reduce armor by that much, you're actually reducing it by more than you would initially think. So we do have a pivot into Mutas with the Protathalors, both of those units coming from the Mutath. Spire over here, if you're a little bit more of a Brood War player. This base very, very seldom saturated. This base never got off the ground. I feel like the economy is definitely favoring Neblime here. So unless he somehow ends up losing, you know, to superior army positioning or something, you know, this army can be scary, but I feel like we're at that stage. This is basically the last fight of the game. And I don't know that Hamster is approaching it with that same level of gravitas. He's kind of like moving in with the Mutas, allowing the Madcaps to take a lot of good damage fights to them. Now the Madcaps are going to start to get shredded by those Artillery Zerg, and the Watchdog is going to be next in line. I would definitely be targeting the Natural in this position, or the third, one or the other. You know, you do want to focus in on one of them, and your units are kind of idling in the rally point. And there's not really any additional units that can hold off versus this force, right? You just use the Protathalors in a separate control group. Maybe you try to get a couple more on this point because you are kind of all in when it comes to that. A Madcap is going to even silence this option for a base. And there you go. The Madrigal's down. The Madcaps and the Anchor are going to be next. And it looks like Hurakan will charge forward bravely but end up getting bopped. The Mutas are really, really valuable here because we did see Wyverns coming out, and there are more of them stacked up over there. So if the air gets wiped, suddenly the Protathalors are going to be really, really, really vulnerable. And it looks like the Madcaps are going to be accomplishing just that as the Mutas end up flying away into death anyway. GG's going to have to be called because Hamster doesn't have much of an economy behind this, and that is how you win versus Hamster Zerg, apparently. You hold out versus the Skith push. You try to be proactive in scouting it so you can prepare a couple extra Watchdogs in advance when your Ant Seal checks them out in the first place. And absolutely, one of the things that Neblime did really well here, despite some of the flusters, despite some of the micro gaffes, I guess, for both players, really. He was able to get his composition in such a stable position that he could hold his bases relatively easily, his initial 3, and start to threaten tempo by pushing out. Terran is this race where you can't give up because you might be able to carve it out, because in order to break you, your opponent has to spend so much money, they probably aren't going to be macroing behind it. So that's what I've observed so far. Maybe we observe something different as the tournaments go on, but hey, we got one more game for you guys, so sit tight. As we begin this final match of this 7-game set, I would just like to point out and remind everybody that Ascension 6's playoffs, right, they do feature a single best of 7, and it will be the grand finals. So in some ways, maybe, in some magical universe, Neblime versus Hamster could actually be our grand final. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it could be a thing. It could be a real thing. So we have the Lemon Neblime. Finally, he received the Lemon color, and he is up against the Orange Hamster. And hey, this color set is way more readable than Alice Blue or whatever the fuck, so happy to see that. Now, we are indeed on Sideshow for one final game. I did receive, obviously, like a while back, there was a set of games where it was like 20 games on Otherworld or whatever. And I was like, all right, bro, I'm not going to do the same map over and over again, but that's one of the reasons why I try to space these out anyway. It's the same players, so now we have like aspects of their game sets being done in different days, so like there's like a gap between them or whatever. That's sort of an idea that I have in mind for how you can space that out, but particularly if they're all on the same map. Now in this case, it's a new map. It's obviously a map that's going to end up being Class 1. It's been played in the tournament already. Seems fairly solid, which, you know, isn't just me talking, but, you know, I definitely consulted a lot of the players during that. Mystery Me found out a really fun spot here where you can put a pylon above this mineral field and to the left of this mineral field and a warden right here. And there you have it. Actually, I guess technically you do here and here, so you could do double. And then I guess you'd have your scribe here. So if you're not familiar with how to mineral walk and try to like get your workers up over that, then you could be in an awkward spot. However, he also thinks that the only time you could really use that is in Protoss versus Protoss, because if you're in Protoss versus Zerg, right, like the Kagra blocks this one right here. And if you're Protoss versus Terran, their workers are way better. They attack faster, and they're much tankier. So good luck actually killing them. Like, they can probably just pop one of the pylons. So it's kind of interesting, though. It's like, that's a blindside cheese you could absolutely do to somebody. And I'm glad that Mystery Meat is remembering his cat and mouse roots and figuring out how to wall you off while he throws a bunch of wardens in your face. So I appreciate that. I hope he does that to somebody in the tournament. If he randoms Protoss on this map, it's a 1 in 3 chance every time Sideshow is played that he ends up doing that. And I hope that's the first thing he does. He just sends one of his first workers out, so it's beautiful. Now that I've kind of given a scouting report on that, maybe nobody will end up using it, but it's still worth pointing out. So, neblime top left, Hamster bottom right. He will be going for a hatch first outside. Well, I guess it's not a hatch first. His Quasith pool is already done, but what I meant to say was his first hatch will be built in the natural. So he's not going to be building it macro style. Looks like he wants to expand first. The other thing that I think this is useful for, because we were kind of talking about this at the beginning of the last game, is like, when would you end up taking this, right? Because your saturation is easier to do on one base. Like, by easier, I mean you take a bit longer to fully saturate your base to reach diminishing returns on your workers. And as a result of that, you do want to expand, but it's only a little bit more efficient in the early stages of the game, right? And I say a little bit because, like, when you're harvesting from the minerals that are super close by, those are more efficient than the ones that are, like, one tile further away. And so you can, like, take these 3, for example. Now, we do have a Kagran Cesium because there is a bio move out, which these Quasis did scout. It's actually going to be a 3 racks, completely bare, just going to be pumping Mavericks, all about the tempo. And again, as I was mentioning earlier, right, the anchor being constructed at the ramp, Circuith no doubt on the way as more units are coming. This extra hatch, you don't really want to cancel it, but you also don't really want to only have like two pairs of Quasis, so it's a really, really tough bind. He should absolutely be trying to use the cliff advantage here, but instead he's going to fall back as more Quasis pop. It's a little bit premature move, and now with this Kagran done, there's going to be a little bit of extra terrain deformation that I don't actually think this anchor can end up doing too much. So 3 of them end up hopping on in. Now at this point, Hamster might want to even pull some workers. He definitely wants to make some more units. I was thinking he could try to block the anchor before it's up. There's going to be a stim move out. Obviously more Quasis are on their way. And you can kind of try to bust this, but 3 stimmed Mavericks is really, really rough to deal with. So what I would like to see is like another defensive circuit here, just to spread more Kagra, just to stop it from landing somewhere that it can attack your workers or aggressing any further than where it is. But there is just more Quasis on the way, nothing else. He sees the liftoff. He should absolutely come in here and try to take some more pot shots, and now he can reclaim this territory. I almost feel like this is maybe a little bit of a mistake by neblime to go for a lower ground containment, because you do have the cliff advantage here. Now, you don't have an advantage in range, right? Mavericks have 1 more range on the Quasi, so even with the +2, the anchor is more than enough to deal with that, because it does also give you +2, and I think that's about to be found out here. So the retaliation is going to be in. But he has a pretty good amount of surface area here. That lower anchor could probably have been killed if he decided to focus it down. So that 1 Mason is going to be challenged there. And it's just nothing but Quasis as additional workers are on the way. As Orchid Shroud, now this is not a bad idea, right? So no more workers are being built. That's what I meant to say earlier when I was talking about workers on the way. I meant the opposite of that. It's just Quasis on the way. But the Zorkish Shroud on the way also is going to allow for a Lakizalisk at some point. Now, a lot of this production has turned into Harakans. They do better against Quasis in general because they do obviously have more HP, but the armor is no longer a factor because Quasis have the 1 armor pin. So they'll be dealing full damage. It's just you're dealing with 80 HP instead of 50, or I guess 350 on the anchor side. More Quasis being made. It's going to come down to the timing of the Zorkas, but we have relatively even military counts here. Obviously, Hamster's a little bit further down, and obviously he's also further down on workers. He's not able to get as much of a surface area on this due to the fact that it's so far away, so he's actually losing a lot of Quasis relatively needlessly, and we do have 2 Lakizalisks on the way. I, for one, would try to chance this and probably maybe die to this particular push, because I would have probably built more workers by this point. So before the Lakizalisks can hatch, they do have a pretty high build time. The Harakans are going to charge on forward. I think the front line is kind of getting thinned out. There's nothing in that anchor, so no additional reinforcements coming. Well, we have 2 more Harakans just showing up, but we have 4 Quasis remaining alive. The anchor's coming in, but there's nothing in it right now. And I feel like neblime may have been rebuffed. Now, again, he's got his ministry set up. He's got only minerals harvested. He has not harvested any Vespene whatsoever, which is not the same for Hamster. And that means that his ability to get detection on the map is super, super late. He has to add on a vestry or build a star pad. Either one is going to cost him gas. And it's kind of gas that he doesn't really have, right? The follow-up unit as well. So I feel like Hamster kind of senses that maybe my opponent didn't end up harvesting much Vespene. Maybe my opponent doesn't have that much on the way in terms of his military. And I honestly think that, oh, just for a second there, Hamster could have maybe caught that the anchor loaded up some Hurricanes. Like, what is his reaction? He's just got some Quasis on a patrol path. He does have more workers finally being made. And honestly, I feel like neblime's in a huge amount of trouble. Some of his Mavericks are taking to the front lines here. They can absolutely stand and overpower these Quasis, but they will have to pull back once that first Lechizilus comes up. And that kind of spells doom, right? The anchor is not being moved up here. That was a little bit awkward. I think he didn't really exactly figure out how burrow works there. And hey, this anchor just ended up, didn't fly over to try to do a counterattack as I was initially thinking. We've got multiple Lechizilusks already dead, and the Cyprians are out on the front line. This is not really a good spot for them to be. They are very, very vulnerable to being hounded by the Quasis. And so I think they absolutely will be overwhelmed here. The Lechizilisk needs to get burrowed. The Quasis definitely could have been microed a little bit better. So it looks like we will. It was just like the worst possible set of circumstances for Hamster. I feel like the fatigue is setting in for him. He has really, really not done a super great amount of work on the macro or the micro side. Macro, I think he's actually doing okay, but he's still behind. That push should have been so much more lethal, but he ends up losing a lot of Lechizilusks early on, and now he's only got one on the way. The Zorka Shroud is a bit of an erroneous target there for neblime, but he wipes out 4 Quasis at the very least, so he's dealing a little bit of damage. We got a second Lechizilisk on the way, actually. And yeah, no worker damage was done. That's the really critical part. Now we've got a Vestry on the way. Now we're probably going to see maybe a Watchdog be placed over here by the Mason. Yeah, indeed it is. So with the Quasi coming, with the anchor with just 2 Mavericks inside, you can kind of deal with that. That's not really the end of the world. We do have another anchor on the way back, which these Quasis could snipe if they end up in the right spot. I guess Ahmed and his dad or something are hanging out over there. I don't know what's going on, but they're having a good time anyway. Ahmed and Ahmed's son. Which one is the dad? Probably the son, honestly. But the anchor is going to go ahead and get popped before it can really do too much. Now, at this point, you do have to fall back a little bit. Will neblime notice that he's got a Mason here on break? I guess not. Oh, now he probably figured it out. Hey, these guys have just been chilling. One of my workers was a fraud. Yep, that's true. That should almost be the thumbnail, but I don't know. It probably isn't super hype when people see Ahmed and Ahmed's son as the thumbnail. Now, we do have a pause on production right now, it looks like. Okay, we've got more Lechizilusks on the way. I was going to say, like, there's a lot of money being banked up here by Hamster. He did tell me that he's had that as a meme following him around when he plays Starcraft 2 as well. It's like just non-stop banking. Now, in this case, he once again is a little bit too liberal with his Lechizilusks. But hey, there's only the one anchor. This is actually still squeaky bum time for neblime. He could absolutely just get overwhelmed by this push. There's a lot of Quasis. He's only got the 2 Cyprians now. That's all a lie. He's got a third one in the lodestone, and it is going to detect. The sort of hopscotch here from the Lechizilusks, again, really proving to be a skill that I feel like Hamster should definitely invest a little bit more time into, because you can absolutely do a little bit more of a cautious leapfrog forward. And at this point, neblime's at 40 Masons, right? Like, he needs to do critical damage here. Now, again, we only have the one single Cyprian for crowd control. And the Zethrakors are here, and they will probably overwhelm this position. Now, they are going to focus down the anchor, another one being built on the high ground. I feel like that's going to cause them a little bit too much focus. They probably could have just killed the lodestone at that point, because there weren't really anybody over here doing too much. We have an Antseal coming. Not going to be super useful versus the Lechizilusks. And we do have a couple of workers being picked off. Now, there are still 2 Lechizilusks over here that could be charging into the mineral line and dealing critical amounts of damage, but they're just idling here. Huge mistake from Hamster as he's macroing back home. He is going to go ahead and leave a burrow. However, the Antseal is out, so that's not going to be too long for this world. And I feel like his position is once again in a very, very, like, low econ. Well, I say low econ, but realistically speaking, he's dealing with 10 less workers. It's actually not as bad as I initially thought. We'll have to see if he can hold out for hope here. The anchor is going to go ahead and fall. The Antseal doesn't have that many shields to protect the Mavericks from the Zeths. And honestly, I feel like a couple more units could just end up getting popped. It is a Zethrakor flood in some ways. He does have a couple over here that need to probably focus down on the clerics before they focus down on anything else, because all the healing passively is just going to allow the Masons to be warriors. And that's pretty funny. We do have more workers had been made in the meantime. Looks like this Zethrakor is just going to start harassing this Watchdog. It will be saved. There is a Wraith over here as well. Honestly, though, this is starting to turn into a pretty scrappy match. I was expecting neblime to end up rebuffing it more handily, especially after the flubbed Lakizalisk micro. Like, initially, I look at, you know, my experience with Zerg, my experience with Lakizalisks versus Bio, even with detection sometimes, it can still be, you can get a critical mass of them. You can just leapfrog forward. You can kind of conservatively siege your position and just push it a little bit further every single time. And that sort of repeated motion, that can be way more pace than the Terran can actually deal with. But at this point, they're on even bases, even enough workers in terms of, you know, what you can actually do. Wraiths are out, so Spraiths are in. And we've got 2 more hatches being added. So going up to 5 hatch off of 2 base, I don't know that Hamster will be able to do too much there, but he is going to also add tier 2. And this tier 2, mind you, is actually faster than Neblime's. So very, very interesting situation where at 12 minutes, the Zerg player gets tier 2 faster than the Terran player. And that is absolutely going to make a pretty big difference. Now, at this point, Hamster has 2 military units. And I'm guessing they're probably in an egg. Apparently, you can hold Alt to see the current count versus the real count. So that's actually useful for casting. I was saying earlier that I feel like maybe it's not super useful when you're playing the game because you're paying attention to so many other things. But we can see those 2 military units are actual units, and it's just the Zephyr cores. He doesn't even have any coming in terms of, you know, defenses or anything. He's got nothing. My homie, my Hamster homie, has decided who needs the actual unit. So he's going to make some quasis. The Spraith is done, so it's going to start tickling from a distance. The Iris being accosted, but not super consequentially. Now, if these Hurricanes get in there because there's nothing to body block them, the Iris can absolutely go down. Once again, like, our players are in an interesting position where it does repeatedly feel like, okay, now that the quasis are out, maybe this is a little bit more defensible. But I fear for Hamster's position, just like I feared for Neblime's position when Hamster just kept sending more and more units over the ways. So it looks like he is going to be trying to make it through and make it work over here. The NCL just, you know, it's going to explore the right side of the base while the rest of the units get slapped and accosted and killed. And in fact, the NCL will even die for its trouble, so that's great. We do indeed have the Iris done, a Mutat Spire almost halfway on the way out. And look at that, we even have a Cyprian dying because it tried to attack something. Everybody knows Cyprians can't attack things. Not unless they're in an anchor. We got 3 Ahmeds charging forward. I'm just going to like start clicking random Hurricanes to see if we get an Ahmed clone. But I don't think we did. Doesn't look like it. Sorry, boys. Sorry, Ahmed bros. We have no clones here. And yeah, with that out of the way, with that job done, we should still see at some point a 3rd base. Obviously, Neblime's tier 2 is halfway done. His 3rd base on the way. So he's going to be ahead macro-wise once again, especially in terms of his workers, but currently not really getting as much efficiency out of it that he could be getting. Mineral line is a little undersaturated here for Hamster, something he might be able to work on, but he's going for mass muta. Well, mass, it's going to be 12 mutas. That's still a good amount. And the bio ball is actually, withdrawing, so at this point we're kind of normalizing into a more standard game, you could say. Maverick in the Lodestone, that's all that's in there. We've got more Fulcrums being added. It looks like we might end up going for the tried and true Madrigal drops again, but we don't see any Trojans on the way just yet. So Neblime is going to have to think about that. We do have a Quasilisk just sort of peering out and seeing what's up. The Hurricanes are going to go ahead and scout the mutas, so that's a little bit awkward there for our buddy boy. Now, at this point, there's only the 4 Watchdogs versus 12 mutas. That is actually going to be enough to put a dent in them, especially with some Wraiths into play. And look, the Quasi even charges in just to get slapped. He does reveal the presence of Watchdogs and presence of Wraiths, so that might be enough to dissuade the mutas from charging on in. There's nothing in that anchor, so I guess that can be dealt with. Now, at this point, engaging with just Wraiths as more mutas are piling in here, that's not very, very solid play from Neblime, and he doesn't actually have that much crowd control, so these mutas could actually do some amount of efficacy. His Bio Ball is charging on forward, and there goes a lot of the Wraiths. So the air pressure coming out of Neblime is going to be reduced a little bit. He ends up stimming and charging into the Lodestone, but it doesn't look like it's going to be enough. The mobility of the mutas proving pretty useful. 2 of them coming in here, not really accomplishing too much, but they slow down the encroachment of the Bio. So that's pretty good. And it looks like Hamster's not really too interested in, oh no, not versus the splash damage. At least spread him up a little bit. Okay, now at this point he could absolutely stay here. His focus fire was kind of on the Masons at some point. I think he just misclicked. He could have stayed there with like 5 mutas and I actually kept that alive. A conga line of Hurakans. It looks like 14 Hurakans are charging off into the sunset. Some Quasis will reach them. And we will have a battle of the centuries. You know, how many can Ahmed roast before he is put down? Looks like a little bit of micro was done there. The Mutas, meanwhile, fighting a little bit more of an exciting and meta fight over here. And yeah, Ahmed is clapped on the other side of the map. Unfortunate. More ticklers were there than he could deal with. Now, 4 Cyprians are still out. They are going to try to zone stuff away, but there was no lodestone made. And our worker count hasn't really budged, despite Neblime's proclivity for building a lot of them, right? That's because, you know, he had to rebuild all the ones that he just lost. So more mutas being added, some Zethicor Quasi charging on forward to try to distract the Cyprians, and indeed they'll do a pretty good job. Only a couple of salvos ended up going there. Here comes some Madrigals. Their kinetic pen will absolutely do a pretty good amount of damage there, and then the deployment comes in, but one of them is picked off, and the Ministry is forced to land, or lift off rather. Honestly, it could even end up getting slapped here, but I think maybe, just maybe, Neblime will be able to push this back. Definitely finding it a bit scrappy, and again, if this is a best of 7, right, as it currently stands, winner takes all, man. Like, after all these games, some of the cheeses, some of the longer macro games, like, Hamster and Neblime end up playing to each other's, I wouldn't say strengths, but they put on an entertaining show, because Neblime's strength is the macro game. Hamster's strength seems to be trying to win a little bit earlier on, but he does like a longer game if need be. And Ahmed is standing over here to stop this this Droleth from building anything, so some Zeths are going to have to come down and clear that. The Mutas are still flying over here, posturing. There's 5 Watchdogs over here, and only the 1 Maverick and the Lodestone still. It kind of feels like this could be engaged upon. Valkyrie is now going to start pathing around because the starport was completed. This base layout isn't superb here, but, you know. And we do actually have a little bit of a focus onto this 1 Valk. There's only 1 Valk, so you can absolutely bop them before they get to a high Valk count, even with the stacked Mutas. He should also try to pick off this Madrigal, but it looks like he's just going to fall away from the Furia. And the Lodestone even gets blown apart due to the bounce damage and the burning. So we'd love to see that. A lot of idle workers. Don't worry about that. It's not like you need the money. And we have Iroleths coming. So that means, boys, we're going to be dropping some Scortriths into Neblime's base. I personally did this with an Othsteleth recently in an FFA, and it was quite interesting. Now you can load up to 3 Scortriths in an Othsteleth, so it's even better than an Iroleth. I'm sure as soon as I say that, Hamster will be like, holy shit. 3! Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Do the 3. Now, Ahmed is still standing charge over the standing tall over the 3 o'clock and the 6 o'clock bases. We have a Valkyrie, an Anseal, and a Trojan that has nothing in it. So I don't know what Neblime was exactly planning over here, but I think maybe it's, you know, Game 7 vibes. He's definitely played a long series. Got to remember that, because we're casting this fresh, like I'm casting like a different set a different part of the set every day. So I'm actually a little bit more fresh than the players are in this respect. Or maybe a lot of bit more fresh. So clerics are getting hemorrhaged here. The splash damage from the Cyprian and the Valk weren't actually activating there, and it looks like the bounce damage even just slapped the Anseal up. Now, the Zethicor push was reposted pretty handily at the, what would that be again, 10.5 o'clock base, the 3rd for Neblime. I guess on this map you could just say 3rd. That's fine. And I'll use the o'clocks for everything else. But no other base is being taken by either players. The 3rd was taken by Hamster by comparison. And it looks like at this point, we are going to be seeing a gas cap at the 3rd, not at the natural or the main. Just sort of panning around here to see what we've got in store for ourselves. And yeah, we have 2 Scortriths and 2 empty Iroleths. Here we go. Okay, load up the other ones. Why not? He's thinking about it. He's done it. So Mass Muta with the Scortriths could actually be a very, very, very painful situation. But I think Hamster's about to taste a little bit of pain himself, because at this point we are preparing for a magical drop, while the rest of the forces gather at the 3rd. Now, the Mutas are on their way. There is only Watchdogs over here, so the Mutas themselves can definitely do a number on this, but it looks like they don't want to bother engaging. That still might focus. Yeah, the Madrigal ends up coming back up here with the Valkyrie, so instead of the drop, it's actually going to be something completely unrelated. Lachezelisks are over here. I'm waiting to see what the drops are. Okay, there's the drops. It's all Scortriths, and the first thing that goes down is actually the Sentinel. So it looks like the bases will end up being traded. Some Protathalors and Lachezelisks are kind of idling out over here and getting bopped. And meanwhile, the Ministry is forced to lift off. I don't know if the Madrigal that was deployed here ended up getting... No, it looks like maybe it never even got dropped. So no unloaded. Nothing unloaded there for it. By the way, I'm not sure why sometimes they can stack. It's a little inconsistent. Who knows what's really causing that? Maybe we can look into fixing that, because obviously it's not intended. But, you know, It was a miracle that we even got a chance to implement something like this to begin with. So no, not your don't burn your own phalanx, Ahmed. What the fuck, dude? That's rude. Just gonna go ahead and drop that in there, but he ends up stacking them up instead of actually being able to drop them a little bit more distantly. And honestly, this just catches people off guard. They're not necessarily practiced against this sort of play where the air superiority was never taken, so the mutas can guard for the Irolets, and that means that the Scorchrits can easily be advanced further on using that. Now here come the Valkyries trying to do their darndest, and unfortunately the mutas idled a lot over the spot where the Madrigal was, so I think a lot of them ended up getting super bruised. Phalanxes are in order as well as Wyverns. I think Wyvern Valk would definitely help here, and a containment is being set up here where additional reinforcements, at least from the ground, can't actually make it up to that third base location. So the thirds have been traded, and once again we are in a very scrappy game where I believe pretty much all of the minerals, well, I say that, but it looks like there's a couple of small ones in the main for Hamster, and a decent chunk of them elsewhere are okay. So another attempt at unloading. The Phalanx will, of course, fall away. One of the Wyverns should end up getting picked off here by the Mutas. Just a couple more shots, and that'll do it, but it looks like they end up getting the better of him. No, there you go. One more shot, and he's gone. Going to go ahead and drop the Madrigals. That's absolutely going to zone away the Mutas. Each individual missile doesn't do that much damage, obviously. And it looks like that's going to force an unload as well. So you can see that this whole area is just a fucking minefield of Kagra. The Ministry being built over here is actually spotted by the Zethar Corps on the left-hand side. A Wyvern's going to go ahead and deal with that. And there is no other base coming in the meanwhile for Hamster. So even though he's got the heroics of the base with the, stopping the third base and stuff like that from going down, even despite all of that, he's still in a rough spot. He doesn't actually have the macro lead because he's a little bit further away from actually taking a base than he would like to be. So he's going to go ahead and try to clean house over here in this position using the Scorchrits themselves. They do trade a little bit. I mean, I was actually expecting them to clean this up a lot easier. But with a little bit of focus fire there, I feel like neblime could have done a little bit of something. Oh my god! No way the Zethar Corps actually killed that Mason. That is brutal. Maybe it didn't, and maybe I'm thinking of something else. Oh, he cancels it. He's not interested in trying to hold it versus the Mutas. All right, well, that was really rough, right? Because he doesn't have another one that he can just lift on over. It looks like at this point all the Masons are going to die, but I mean, neblime knows that those are expendable. He can land on this Kagra when there's no when there's nothing like actually producing it. You can just land right on it. It looks like this Ministry is a little bit confused. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if neblime's aware of that. So basically, when you don't have an active generator for the Kagra itself, then you can land on it. And if it's your allies or if it's neutral, you can also land on it or build on it or whatever. So it feels like maybe he's not aware of that mechanic because he could just do it. Maybe he'll see it that it's all green when he tries later on when it's a little bit further receded. But it doesn't look like that's something that he's conscious of right now. Because he could land on it any time. He could land on it any time. I feel like that definitely would have affected this stage of the game. More mutas, more Protathalors. This is a really deadly composition when you don't have like Durandals or, I don't know, like heavy air or something that can achieve air superiority since Protathalors can't attack. Now I say that, but 3 Valks are dealing with all of the mutas right now. So maybe it's okay. And we do also have all of these Scorchrits and Circuits ready to be dropped. An Apostle is out, a couple of them in fact. They could absolutely turn the tide here, but they aren't really currently being used. Wyvern's instead trying to take position. And they will zone away the Protathalors and, of course, the inevitable air defenses. I actually don't know what happened with the mutas. I think maybe they were falling back so that they could get a couple more. But yeah, the Apostles could have tried to revive some units there, and they just end up getting bopped. A little bit of poor micro. I think he was trying to take some of those mutas or Protathalors for his own, but he ends up overextending a little bit there. And he doesn't really have that many resources, right? Now, there was a Madrigal drop elsewhere on the map at the 3rd. It doesn't kill too many workers. He's going to try to chase and pursue. There's a Lechizalisk over here, funnily enough. But yeah, here come the mutas. I guess that's probably what they came back for, to try to zone away. And yeah, at the end of the day, he kills maybe 4 workers in total. But he does disrupt mining time, the 3rd base being operational. And yeah, now he should have realized, oh wait, I could have issued the land order before the Kagra even receded over there. That's weird. I never saw that before. And away they go. Had to take a sponsored sip. Shout out to Biddy B. He did an interview with me and with Meska myself actually before he played his game against Hamster for playoffs. So we will cast the result of that on Thursday, which I guess I'm trying to get the timing here. Yeah, I think, so when you, okay, GG's are going to end up being called. That was a little anticlimactic. So yeah, on the day of this video, I should have said this at the beginning, when this video goes live, we'll actually be casting the playoffs. You'll be able to see more of Hamster and indeed more of neblime in the quarterfinals, but they won't be facing off against each other yet. That being said, this game, this series, was pretty entertaining. We got to see Hamster eventually clutch it out, and that means that the final score is going to be 4-3. If this were a best of 7 in the grand finals of the tournament where Hamster took on neblime, Hamster would be our champion. Will that actually happen? Just another thing for you to think about as we make our way over towards those playoffs. And shout out to neblime and Hamster for putting on a nice show for us. This is one of the higher level series we've seen. I'm sure that the level will only go up. Yeah, really, there's no way that it could go down at this point because we're getting a lot of new people, a lot of attention from some pretty high up there players with a lot of history in RTS games and stuff. I think the next tournament especially is going to be like the most contentious one. But this tournament already, between Hamster coming in, Keen trying to rock up and maybe practice a little bit more, I kind of feel like this tournament's also going to be pretty base. That's not to mention the top 3 that we've had for a while now. So who knows what's going to happen? You're going to have to find out by clicking on the next video that you see from this channel. So I guess you should subscribe and maybe send me some money. GG's.